houses you could live in, to the amount of clothes you could wear. You can have, supposing you wore 3 suits a day, and you wanted to be different all the time, there were 365 days of the year, multiply that by 3, and that's enough for anyone who dresses also. But that there is a real limit. And you would consider, if you were wearing a completely different suit for 1/3 of the day, and you never wore it again, after a while that would become a bit absurd. You might find a favorite suit, one that you felt suited you. What is a suit except something that suits you? And you would go back to it.
Good evening, friends. The city's debt has been growing faster.
Same with a woman. You find you've got a favorite one, and you want to go back to her and keep her around. See? Then you have a house. You can have hundreds of houses if you're very rich, but you find you have a favorite one. You want to go back. So there are limits to what we can enjoy in a material, physical, real sense. Although I must say, when I say real, and I also join with that the word physical and material, the real world is not necessarily physical or material. The ideas that come out of the history of Western culture that we say physical or material, these are purely conceptual. You see, when somebody says, I'm a materialist, and I think there is nothing but material, see, and all the spiritual stuff is just fantasy. The idea of material is itself fantasy. These flowers are not material. Material is an idea. It's a concept. These flowers you can only understand by looking and feeling. We don't know what they are. We see the patterns of energy and the delight of them. But a person who says, well, this is just material, doesn't realize that he's some kind of a phantast. He's trying to say, he's trying to put his personality up against the spiritual people who say the real thing in life is beyond all this.
I don't care.
There is a happy land far, far away. There is some kind of a thing beyond all this. And that's a kind of one-upmanship. People in religion are the worst game players in the world. They're always trying to outface each other.
We declared bankrupt.
Have the right perception. Even among the most orthodox confraternities, say Orthodox Catholic theologians, they're always trying to one-up each other. Say, yes, sir, you believe that your explanation of the doctrine of the Trinity is very correct, but there are certain subtle respects in which you haven't quite got the point. And they go round and round and round on this forever. Because it's not really religion.
I have made it clear to the Israeli leadership that I do not support their expansionist ideas. The indigenous people of that land have rights that cannot be ignored. We must find a fair solution, not one dictated by any single group. I have made it clear to the Israeli leadership that I do not support their expansionist ideas.
At one point in Chicago, we had 14 aldermen. There's none now. So what's happened? Bologna has moved to the suburbs, and when he moves to the suburbs, is diluted among the many municipalities. When people say to me, how can we save St. Adalbert's? I say, move back into the city. They, well, we can't do that. I said, well, there you are. If you can't move back into the city, you can't save St. Adalbert's. At one time, there were 60 Polish Catholic churches in the city. Today, there are quite a bit fewer. And don't forget Polish Jewish synagogues. The majority of Jews in Chicago were Polish Jews. It's a diaspora that's had a tremendous impact on the city.
I killed that first deer with a sawed-off 22 rifle, no sights on it. 15-year-old played hooky and scoop. Boy, it was going round. Me trying to, it wasn't dead. I finally got it by the leg, and I tried to get a shell with my gun. It was taking me everywhere, and I finally got one in there, pulled out a hammer back, finally got it down there this year. Spat! I got it. I killed that first deer with a sawed-off 22
Coisas que acontecem na sua cor.
Most of the adults who live in the tenement on South Ellis Avenue were born in rural areas of the South. They came to Chicago looking for a better way of life. About all that they brought with them were their hopes and their dreams. Bill Staples and his wife Gloria came from Alabama.
Well, I mean, every man got a dream, you know. Everybody have a dream, and you dream of going any place to make good, you know, to make it better for my family, better education for my kids. These are the prime reasons I came up from.
But when I came to Chicago, I just thought I was going to something, you know, that was just great, something I had never been to before. I just thought everything was going to be like heaven, I guess, when I got here. But when I got here, I found out that it wasn't.
I found a better job, but I can't say that I found a better living conditions because the living conditions were not as good as they were at the time.
The hope I really had when I come here to do better. But after I got here and started work, it looked like to me I did worse because I made more money. I didn't make no more money, but I could save more money when I was living in Memphis, Tennessee.
They found high rents in segregated slums, and in general, they found that the poor pay more.
When you're in a town like Chicago, the first thing, the easy credit houses are the worst ones. I mean, in other words, if you went in and bought this guy, said, well, I'll take a chance on it. Okay, you buy 30, I'll pay $60 for it. This is a fact. And this man, once by the suit farm, you miss one payment, they have what is known here as a wage assignment.
They found that the market for unskilled labor was shrinking. They found that in the North, too, the color of a man's skin could determine whether he got a job or a card in certain labor unions. Their women found an isolation they had never known in the South.
It's very lonely. In fact, it's been lonely ever since I've been here because I would like to have somebody, even if it was a distant, you know, relative. Somebody
Blacks in Chicago have
you
been
know,
garnishing
just talk to
wages for
sometime when I
100
need, you know,
years.
someone to talk to.
Everyone says pretty much the same. Because I don't know, it might save a lot of frictions, you know. Is no one too chummy. We all know one another and we say hello.
Do we have the right here in the United States to say that we're going to kill tens of thousands, make millions of people as we had, millions of people refugees, kill women and children as we had? There's 35,000 people without limbs in South Vietnam, 150,000 civilian casualties every year. Thousands of children are killed because of our efforts. Do we have that right here in the United States to perform these acts because we want to protect ourselves so that we don't have, it's not a greater problem for us here in the United States? I very seriously question whether we have that right. And I think other people are fighting it. Other people are carrying the burden. But this is also our war. Those of us who stay here in the United States, we must feel it. When we use napalm, when a village is destroyed, civilians are killed, this is also our responsibility. This is a moral obligation and a moral responsibility for us here in the United States. I think we've forgotten about that. And when we switch from one point of view to another, I think that we've forgotten about it. And I think that it should be discussed. And all of us should examine our own conscience of what we are doing in South Vietnam.
And treated me so well. I've been loved by everyone here.
When they filled that up, they opened up Welbeck Street, which ran along next to it. And when they filled that up, they got Queen Anne Street, which ran parallel. And the whole area is nothing but physicians, surgeons, and dentists. And they're all fantastically prosperous because they've got the right address. See, once you got into Harley Street, you're there. So it's like you're a guru, and you set up in Sausalito or Big Sur or Hollywood, whatever you're in the right place. And we can take any number. The more we have, the more prosperous everybody will be. This is the economics of plenty. And it's all based, you see, if you really work it right, it's based on a big turnover. You don't try to capture people. You don't try to make them faithful to you. You don't want to tie them up. But you see, if you do that, you set them all free, you really get them going. That's what you're supposed to do. That's your job. Deliver it. And then they're grateful and they send their friends to you. So, the craft of mysticism. You see, I just want to be very frank with you because, after all, you pay to come to these seminars. And in India, it's considered very, very immoral to ask for money for spiritual teaching. But that's a different culture from ours. In the United States, it would be immoral not to ask money. Because in the United States, people disrespect anything they get free. And they have to give money as a token of their sincerity, just as, say, in India or in China, you have to give something else. You have to wait a long time. You have to be persistent in token of your sincerity. But in this country, the hangout is money.
Colonel said, what?
So naturally, one asks for money. A person like myself only needs a relatively small amount of money. And so, if you make an awful lot of it by being a successful guru, you give the rest away. Or do something creative and imaginative. Allen Ginsberg has a foundation. He makes a great deal of money by being a crazy poet. And he gives all that he doesn't need to help other poets. So then, meditation, we are not trying to gain anything. To alter your state of mind from what it is now into some other state which you think it ought to be in. You are centering in where you are. But you see, the difficulty for us with this is that we do everything. We even eat, we play, we dance, under the fundamental assumptions that all this is good for us. We go to concerts to improve our culture, to the theater, to the movie, in order to be able to say, we have become more educated. We have improved. And as a result of this kind of motivation, we don't really do those things at all. If you go to the concert to become more cultured, you are not really listening. So meditation, above all things, because it's got a slightly disciplinary flavor to it, a slightly religious flavor to it, is something that people use somehow to get ahead in the game of spiritual one-upmanship. And I get sick and tired of people who go and study Zen and come back and brag about the long hours of meditation they put in, and how much they've spent, and what a great ordeal it was, and how good it was for them, and how you who haven't gone through this discipline are a kind of underling. See, I've had this put on me for years, because I didn't go to Japan and didn't sit around with Zendos and worked it my own way. And they say, well, you are just a dilettante. See, you haven't suffered as much as we have. And you really ought to suffer. You ought to put up with those long endurance tests. Now, the reason why in meditation one sits in a certain way, whether you sit like I'm sitting now, or whether you sit in the lotus posture, your legs become a little uncomfortable. And the reason for that is not self-punitive, it's merely that it helps you to stay awake. That's all. And if you don't, if you were floated in a hot tub with supporters in a completely dark room, in a sensory deprivation chamber, you would very likely go to sleep. But the point in meditation is to be wide awake, without, however, the intellectual chatter going on in the head. And so a posture which involves a very certain subordinate degree of discomfort keeps you awake. Actually, when you get used to sitting this way, I can sit this way without extreme discomfort for at least 40 minutes, even longer. And it becomes natural. But as I explained, the point is to be wide awake and aware of your total sensory input without confusing it with the symbolic world of words and concepts. So that you experience life naked and directly. Experience you naked and directly, without having in your head the concept of who you are as a role player, as a personality, as an ego. And this becomes, in due course, a very pleasant thing to do. So that meditation becomes not something that you put in so much time at, like you might put in time in a jail, but becomes a pleasure. Of course, from the point of view of our religion in the United States, that's almost sinful. Religion isn't supposed to be a pleasure, because it's supposed to be joining with Christ in suffering on the cross. No, there's enough inevitable suffering going on anyhow. You're going to die one of these days. Everybody encounters difficulties in their lives. You don't need to go out of your way to seek them. So now, there are two fundamental approaches to meditation. One, you can see this morning, Charlotte was getting us to bounce on our heels and to stretch as tightly as we could to overcome gravity. And then after that, she said, see what happens when you don't do it. So one of the methods of meditation is to stretch as tightly as possible. To concentrate with your whole energy on a point. And to use the maximum amount of that. You see, in yoga, there's an exercise called kumbha, which is a way of breathing, which is... It's a kind of force. Holding the breath as long and as tightly as you can. That was like the stretching we did. That's like those people who, say, in the Tendai temple up on Mount Hiei over Kyoto, who practice bowing. Thousands and thousands of bowings. They stand up, they kneel down, prostrate themselves on the floor, get up again, stand up, kneel down, prostrate them on the floor. And there are those Tibetan monks who do the Lungompa, running through the mountain trails with enormous leaps. And they do like Nijinsky could do those leaps, where you pause a little bit in the air and seem to overcome gravity and then drop again. And they go on and on and on, bouncing along a road. Or there are other pilgrims who prostrate themselves at every step, traveling a long journey. There are people who run the streets of Kyoto, 100 miles through the streets of Kyoto every day, at a jog trot. There are all kinds of things like that, where you work yourself to a limit in struggle. Because in doing that, you get a thing which runners call second wind. And second wind in running is where you are no longer running, but it runs you. Where, in other words, the ego energy in the running is displaced, and the energy of the whole organism takes over. And that is all the energy of the whole universe. When you get second wind. So you get second wind in this fierce kind of meditation. Alternatively, there's another way in. And in this way is a kind of so-called easy way. And one uses it for a different type of personality. There are certain people who must have the difficult way because they don't know they exist unless they're sitting on a spike. And those kind of people who don't believe they're real unless they hurt have to follow the difficult way. But there is a subtle way, which is the Taoistic approach, wherein instead of trying to master and dominate your body-mind, you let go of it. And you let it do whatever it wants to do. Let's suppose, for the sake of example for a moment, you just close your eyes and allow your eardrums to respond to any sound going on. There are no proper sounds or improper sounds. You may feel free to shift, shuffle, cough, sneeze as you will. Don't try to identify, locate, or name the sounds that you hear. Just let the rippling air play with your eardrum. And as you hear the sound of my voice coming across to you, listen to what I have to say simply as terms. Your brain will take care of understanding. You don't try to understand. In other words, allow your ears to hear anything they want to hear. And to assist you in this, keep your tongues relaxed in the lower jaw. Listening to every sound in the whole field of air vibrations, as you would listen to music, as you would listen to Bach or Ravi Shankar, without trying to see any meaning. There is no hurry. This is what there is. Well, now, of course, one can do that through all the senses, not just the ears, but the body feeling, skin contact, the breath, sense of smell, taste, and also, of course, the eyes. It's more difficult to do it with the eyes because our culture, as Marshall McLuhan has pointed out, is excessively visual. And because of the Gutenberg galaxy, because of making sense out of print and the enormous valuation placed on literacy, we've overbalanced one sense, which is the visual sense. When we say to somebody, you smell, that's uncomplimentary. We should say, of course, correctly, you stink. If we mean you have a bad smell. But everything connected with smell is repressed. And therefore, because we still continue to smell, it is an unconscious sense through which we relate to each other in ways that we don't know. You take an instinctive liking to someone because you like the smell, but you don't know that. You take an instinctive dislike to someone because you don't like the smell, but you don't know that. All sorts of things, all sorts of messages are passed through the nose, but we're not aware of them. We don't have an adequate vocabulary of the smell. Only 3 adjectives in English are associated with smell uniquely: acrid, pungent, fragrant. All the others are associated with borrowed from other senses. Think how many adjectives we have for vision, for sound, for taste. Although taste, of course, is inseparable from smell. So, the second way of meditation, which I was demonstrating to you, allowing your ears to hear whatever they want to hear. In the same way, you allow your breath to breathe any way it wants to breathe. You allow your muscle skin feeling, the sense of touch, to feel any way it wants to feel. You allow your eyes to see anything they want to see. And finally, you allow your mind to think anything it wants to think. Let it go. This is the relaxed way. The other way is the tense way. They come to the same conclusion. You go around this way, take the right-hand path and go there, take the left-hand path and go there. I'm not going to evaluate between one and the other. It's up to the individual. But the way Charlotte and I have been interested in for a long time is the way which is natural, which doesn't force things, and which lets the organism, with its own inner sense of what is correct, do it by itself. So, if you will let your mind, see, alone, you don't try to it do whatever it wants to do. Whatever thoughts want to flow through your head, let them flow. Don't try either to get with them and make something of it. Don't try to stop them. Just let them go. Besides, who are you? As distinct from your thoughts, as distinct from your visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory sensations. Who might intervene and say, you do otherwise? Because when we get that terrific split between our experience, our feelings, our sensations, on the one hand, and on the other, something called the experiencer, the control agent who has and who directs all these things, there's the root of our trouble. Because we are confusing ourselves with an image of ourselves. And under those circumstances, we define the living organism as a material object. The body, which corrupts, and which is somehow antithetical to spirit. Not realizing that the idea of the body as something antithetical to spirit is purely a conception. This is not a conception. And as we see it now from the standpoint of 20th century quantum physics, it's a shimmering phenomenon of electrical energy. It's a light show. This isn't what we used to think of as physical at all. You know, block, chunky stuff. It's a zizzing dance. It's like fire. That's the meaning of the Buddhist figure Fudo. This guy with a sword in one hand and a rope in the other, with a fierce face and flames all around. Fudo means immovable. He is showing you everything is fine. It's like I said this morning, a flame seems to be a flame, a thing with sticks in one position. So Fudo, this flaming god, the sword, which cuts off all entanglements, and the rope. I don't know what the rope's for. Maybe just for wiggling. He cuts loose our conceptions so that we can see this all too solid flesh dissolve. Now, if everybody's comfortable, we can get started. I've announced that this seminar is to be about the cosmic network. And therefore, we've got to spend the first evening understanding something about the nature of networks. Because in order to get the principle of a network across, I have to convey to you an idea which is extremely simple, but which is difficult to grasp only because we're not used to it. We are used to thinking as Westerners as having a certain kind of language and therefore a certain kind of logic that goes with it. We're used to thinking of the world in terms of the game of billiards. In other words, we are still thinking about our psychology, our bodies, and their relationship to the outside world in terms of what would scientifically be called Newtonian mechanics. And Newtonian mechanics has a very long history because it goes back to some of the atomic theories of people like Democritus, who were among the great pre-Socratic philosophers of ancient Greece. And so we may as well begin with a little bit about the history of the idea of an atom, because this has always fascinated people. What is the world fundamentally? What is all this? Well, one way of finding out is to take a knife and chop something in two, so you can see what's inside it. What is an apple inside? What is a seed inside? What is a human body inside? And then you find that when you chop a thing in two, you've got two pieces, but the cutting reveals that it has a structure inside. chop until we've got bits so small that they're the same width as the edge of the knife. And they can't be cut anymore unless we can find a finer knife. And so when we get down to that bit beyond which there is no bitter, it is called in Greek atomos, which means the first letter A is non, tomos, cut. And so the word atom means that smallest particle of the world which can't be cut into any smaller particle. That's the original idea of atomism. So they went further than that to the notion that the world was built in the same sort of way that a house could be built of bricks or stones. The world is seen, therefore, as a composite of fundamental particles. Then what remained to be discovered was the laws governing the relationship between these particles. And so naturally one thought of them as little balls. Why balls? Because balls are hard to cut. If you take a ball bearing and hit at it with a sword, it's liable to jump right onto one side. A cube will submit to being cut, but a ball is very difficult to get at. Very strong form of nature. So people have always tended to consider atoms as balls, especially atoms of liquid. There was a notion, you see, that the atoms of the element of Earth were cubes, because cubes all sit together rather firmly. Liquid, which when you put up with glue, that were balls. Fire was made of, if I remember rightly, pyramids. Air, I can't remember what air was made of. And what their atoms were shaped like. Maybe sausages or something like that, because air is pretty difficult to get at too. But they had some ideas. But fundamentally, what has influenced Western thought, and still influences Western thought, is the idea of an atom as some sort of fundamental little planetary system. And so these things come into relationship with each other and they bang each other around, as in the game of billiards. And so if we are to understand the world profoundly, we have to find out what are the laws governing the relationship of the atoms. Now, you must understand first of all a principle about what are called laws of nature. We inherit the idea of laws of nature from our theology. And our theology that we've grown up with is in certain ways peculiarly different from the theologies of Oriental Jews. Jewish theology and Christian theology, which have entered very profoundly into the common sense of the average person, have an image of the world which is quite basically political, and we'll go further than that and say it's monarchical. It's based on the idea that the world is a construct evoked out of nothingness by the commandment of a celestial king. Now, there may be Jews in this room who are practicing and devout Jews, or there may be Christians in this room who are practicing and devout Christians. And I don't want to offend you by any imagery that I choose or remarks that I may make about this imagery. Because I don't suppose that anybody has come to this room, to this particular place, who is either a practicing or Christian Jew, who has what I would call a naive idea of God. But the funny thing is about our ideas of God is that our symbols, the images, the mythological forms which we use to describe God, have an extremely powerful influence on our feelings and on the way we behave. After all, I was a member of the Church of England when I was a small boy, and that had a very powerful effect on me. And in the Church of England, it's quite obvious, from an emotional point of view, as distinct from a very intellectual point of view, that God stands behind the King of England. And the King of England and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the whole hierarchy of lords and ladies and noblemen and officials who descend from this point are somehow involved, at any rate this is perfectly clear to a small boy, are somehow involved with the hierarchy of heaven. Because at morning prayer, to which we went every Sunday, the minister would pray a prayer which began, O Almighty Father, high and mighty, King of kings, Lord of lords, the only ruler of princes, who dost from thy throne behold all the dwellers upon earth. Most heartily we beseech thee with thy favour to behold our most gracious sovereign Lord King George, etc. And so this was a very courtly procedure at which the clergyman, dressed in his proper robes, proceeded to the altar, which is a kind of earthly symbol of the throne of heaven, made due obeisance, and presented this petition with all proper humility. Now, these are things that if you're brought up in that environment, you take for granted. That seems to be the natural attitude to God. But imagine someone coming in from a culture where God is not conceived in the image of kingship. How strange he would find this behavior. That must be basically terrifying. That's why he has to have all these protections, why he has to be addressed in the right form of language. So you go into a court today, an ordinary U.S. law court. There is a very strict etiquette. And if you start laughing, the judge will bang the gavel and threaten contempt of court and all sorts of dire punishment. Because here, everybody has to be serious. It's like on the parade ground. All those Marines lined up. No, and they salute the flag, and they have to have a very grim expression on it. Serious. And so, in the courts of kings, they have to be serious because kings are afraid of laughter. They're also afraid of being attacked suddenly. So everybody has to kneel down. Because if you kneel down or prostrate yourself, you're at a disadvantage. And the king stands or sits at his throne with his bodyguards ranged on either side. Be like that. We've already got the form of the church. The bishop at his throne, his attendant canons and clergy flanking him on either side. And so, certain great Catholic cathedrals are called basilica. And basilica, from the Greek, basileus or basilus, is the king. So the basilica is the court of the king. The very titles of God in the Bible, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, are of course borrowed from the Persian emperors. The Cyrus is the Greek word, Kyrios, meaning Lord. So the Mass begins with the invocation, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy upon us. The titles are borrowed from the Persian emperor. And so the rites that have become associated with Christian religion are reflections of the great autocratic monarchs of the ancient Near East. The Cyruses of Persia, the pharaohs of Egypt, and people like Hammurabi, who were the great Chaldean monarchs. The universe was conceived then as being ruled on a political pattern. Like that, so that Hammurabi in particular, and Moses after him, they were the wise ones who laid down the rules. They were the patriarchs who said, now this is the way everybody's going to be. And since you can't all agree among yourselves as to what the rules are going to be, I'm going to tell you what to do. Since I'm the toughest guy around here, and I got these brothers of mine who are pretty tough too, we're going to say, this is the law, see, you got to obey. So, this is how we have got historically the idea of there being a law of nature. That somebody told nature what to do. For example, a wonderful poem by Father Feeney about bees. God, to some sticky stuff not yet alive in a hive, said, come, be my bee and buzz as I did. And sure enough, it was, and it did. See, and in the beginning, let there be light. A command. So commandment is the fundamental idea. So the quest of the law of nature is the quest for the true understanding of the word of God. For by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. In the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. What is that word? If we could find out the word of God, here is the idea, see, we could perform incredible magic. That's why, for example, the name of God in the Bible is not to be uttered except once by the high priest in the Holy of Holies, once a year. Otherwise, that name, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh in Hebrew, we don't really know how it's pronounced. And Jehovah mixes up those consonants with the vowel of Adonai. And then it's all mixed up in translation. But anyway, Jehovah is a polite way of saying what can't be said. Because if you know the word, if you know the name of God, you have power. You have the power of God. And so all ancient ideas of magic were based on knowing the names of God. It is said that there are 100 names of God, and 99 are revealed to us. And the camel knows the 100th name, which is why he looks so snooty. But so also, a person in what we now call primitive orders of society are loath to reveal their names. Because if I know your true name, I can utter it and have power over you. Now, we say, well, that seems a very naive idea, but it is exactly through the knowledge of names that we have Western science. And that is magic. That is to try to understand the laws of nature. So that if you could understand the word, underneath all the phenomena, you could change the phenomena and create magic. Only this, that many scientists are rather sophisticated and have realized that the word comes later than the event. That in the beginning wasn't the word. Of course, if you want to make new sense out of the phrase in the beginning was the word, you have to go to Hinduism, where they have the idea that Vak, V-A-C in Sanskrit, or speech, is the basis of creation. whole mystery of things is vibrating energy. On and off. Simple as that. Life and death. Life is on, death is off. Have on, have on, have on, have off. It's quite a relief. But there they say that's the beginning. Now, but they also say, in another sense, on another level, that the roots of Sanskrit, say the root form, say the word Buddha, comes from the root form Bud, which means to know or to be awake. Bhava, which means becoming, comes from the root Bhut, which means to grow. So, karma, doing, comes from the root kri, to act. So they say, though, that the roots of Sanskrit are not simply the roots of a language, they're the roots of life. Because in another sense, altogether, you see, you create the world by the word. And this is something that we're not very conscious of. It's the way you think that determines your basic reactions to what happens. In the words of Shakespeare, there is nothing either good or ill, but thinking makes it so. Thinking is talking to yourself inside your head. And we, through this, build up all sorts of weird notions. We say, for example, well, one day you'll have to die. Have to. What's the sense? What's the emotional content of saying you'll have to die? It means it's going to be something imposed upon you against your will. So it's put in this passive mode. Have to. You'll be compelled to die. But I can't be compelled to die unless I'm fighting it. Supposing I wouldn't die. Supposing I commit suicide. Or supposing we look at it all in another way and say, when I get a disease and die as a result of it, getting a disease is something I do. Just as much as taking a walk. Only we've got our thoughts arranged so that we say, you ought not to get a disease. Even if it's just plain old age. Somehow, you ought not to do that. You ought to go on. You can't say, when death comes about, I laid me down with a will. Because we've got this hang-up about life being divided into two parts. Things that we do, on the one hand, and things that happen to us on the other. And Buddhists say, what happens to you is your karma. And people don't readily understand that. They think my karma, something awful happened to me because of something bad I did in my last life. And therefore, I've got bad karma. Karma simply means your doing, your action. So that when something that happens to me is called my karma, it means that it's your own doing. And if you recognize that it's your own doing, it's never bad karma. It's only bad karma. If you refuse to admit that it's your own doing and merely blame someone or something else, that it's something that happened to you. Now, I digressed a little because what I was getting at was the meaning of the law of nature. Laws of nature. The word taken over, the idea of the law of nature was taken over by Western science from this ancient magical notion of the word of God, the commandment of God being the foundation for everything that happens in the world. But now, today, in Western 20th century science, there is an entirely new idea of the law of nature. The laws of nature are not things that exist in any real sense, which phenomena like the motion of stars or the behavior of animals, of rocks, they're not phenomena which these things obey. The universe is doing its stuff. But because we have a certain kind of structure and brain, we want to make sense of it. And therefore, we find various ways of understanding the world by the principle of regularity. Now, what's that? Let's take a clock. A clock ticks regularly. But the world does not tick regularly. Inconveniently enough, the sun does not have the earth go around it in a neat 360 days. This has always irritated calendar makers. How to make a rational calendar? There is no solution. Because the rotations of the earth upon its own axis do not neatly synchronize with its rotation around the sun. There's always something a little odd about it. So what we do is we superimpose over this rather odd elliptical path the ideal figure of a circle with its 360 degrees. Now that is also like are a method, a technique that human beings have invented for measuring things. And so we can cut out a piece of cloth or a trunk of a tree so many feet. Well, originally, it's simply comparing the trunk with us by putting our feet over it one after another, saying it's so many feet long, or so many spans when you stretch out the hand. There's a fundamental idea of measurement, and the inch is, of course, one joint. Not sure how to talk. And so this comparison of man's body and its regular shape, you see 10 fingers on either side, 5 fingers on either side makes 10, 5 toes on either side makes 10. And so by stretching ourselves out, as it were, against nature, we measured it. And the idea of measurement is the same idea as the idea of the law of nature. A law of nature is exactly the same kind of thing as a ruler, or a hammer, or a saw. It is a way of thinking which enables us to control our environment. By observing regularities, and then by making a calculus, which is a process really of betting, will it be regular next time? And the odds are that it may be. If it's done it once this way, it's likely to do it again that way. So in this way, you predict eclipses of the sun. You predict the phases of the moon. You measure, you count it, how it went, how often did it like this, how often did it like that. And you say, well, it keeps on doing it. And you think, well, it's fascinating. It seems to obey me, because now I can tell you any time it's going to come up. And if the other people around haven't figured it out, they think I'm naiving, because I'm going to say to them, the moon is going to change at such and such a time, so many days from now it's going to have a different shape. And they say, my God, he was right. And they'll think I'm making it happen. Because I can do that. And so I get a rather privileged position. Because I can predict. But that's the basic idea, you see, of the law of nature. The law of nature is a human network. Like the lines of celestial latitude and longitude, they don't exist in the heavens. But we project them on the sky in order to measure the positions of the stars. Because the stars are scattered in a very confusing way. And just try and remember that math and figure it out. So the clever ones, you see, just said, look at it through a network, a spherical network. You can number all the squares of a spherical network in accordance with the principles of the circle of 360 degrees. You throw the network on the sky. It isn't really there, you see. Then to help you a little further, pick out some of the big stars and see if they make a shape. You know, this is like they're doing a Rorschach test. And you see, oh, look, there's one over there that looks like a diddler. Or some people call it a plow. And there's one there that looks like a cross. There's one there that, by some extreme wangling, can be made to look like a virgin. And all these lines that join the constellations together are our ways of projecting a pattern upon this great and glorious confusion, so that we can remember it and chart it. But obviously, you can very well see that if you looked at the same pattern of stars from some completely different position in space, all those constellations and their arrangements would vanish. And you'd have to invent a new one. Because there is nowhere where the stars really are. It depends where you're looking from. So in this sense, then, man in nature, with his extraordinary symmetrical brain and its amazing complications, figures it out. And it's man who introduces the law into the world. He invents it. But in a way, invenire, to invent, is to discover. But what we discover, in a way, is not something that's out there. When we invent the laws of nature, we are discovering something about ourselves and our own passion for prediction, for regularity, for keeping things under control. Therefore, there has to be a law. So then, going back right now to the beginning of what I started to say, the question was then, what is the law of relationship between the atoms? Between the fundamental billiard balls of which the world is composed? Well, you watch the game of billiards, and there's a cue, and it hits that ball, and then it moves over, and it hits that one, and then that hits that one, and that hits that one. And so the final ball, which moves into the pocket, has its behavior explained through its contact with the other billiard balls and final contact with the cue. That's why it did it. And so this educated people. They would say it's very difficult to figure it all out because the whole thing is so complicated. But if you could know all the details involved in, say, the behavior or a single act of a human being, you would find that it was the ineluctable result of a series of bouncing balls against each other, fundamental atoms that predisposed the great final event to be just like that. So that theory of the relationship between the atoms is called, in technical language, catenary. C-A-T-E-N-A-R-Y, catenary. A catenary effect, or a relationship between events, is like, for example, to use another illustration, when you stand a row of bricks up, end up, no? And you knock over the first one, and they all go fall down. That is a catenary sequence. But it becomes increasingly obvious today to the physicists and to the biologists that that will not do as a sufficient description of how various events affect each other. And so there's another type of causal relationship altogether, which is called, instead of catenary, reticulate. R-E-T-I-C-U-L-A-T-E, reticulate, from the Latin, rete, meaning a net relationship. Wherein, in other words, any given event is not simply ascribed to one or more previous events, but that the relationship between the past and the present, and between the present and the future, is all to be taken into consideration in understanding any one event. In other words, let's take one event. I drop a ball and it bounces. Let's say it's an event. I don't know how many events it really is, but we'll just say, for the sake of argument, that it's an event. Now, is it enough in describing the event to say, I let the ball go, it obeyed the law of gravity, it hit the floor, but because it was made of rubber and had some air inside it, it bounced, and sort of slightly disobeyed gravity because it had an energy in it. But that's not enough. Because that the ball dropped, that I let it go, that it bounced, depended not merely upon a historical sequence of events that you can lay out in a string along a line of time. It depends also upon a present context. There must be a certain density of air. All kinds of things have to coexist with this in order for me to be there to drop the ball at all, much less manufacture a ball. So that what happens must be considered not merely as a historical phenomenon, but it must be seen in context. Context is terribly important, because it isn't just when a thing happens that is important, it's where it happens. In what setting? So that you could say that my blood in my veins is in a certain setting. In a test tube, it's in a completely different setting. And in a test tube, my blood is not behaving in the way it behaves in my veins. Therefore, it's not the same thing. Say that we human beings are intelligent. Now, if that is so, then the environment in which we live must also be intelligent. Because we are symptoms of that environment. And I don't for the life of me see how you could have intelligent symptoms of an unintelligent organization. We belong in this world. We didn't arrive here somewhere else. We're not tourists in the universe. We're expressions of it. Like branches express the tree, or fruit express the tree. And so you will not find an intelligent organism living in an unintelligent environment. That is to say, the environment in which you live will be a system of mutual cooperation between a vast complexity of different kinds of organisms. And the total balance of that makes your life possible. In other words, human life goes with, as front goes with back, an extremely complex bacteriological world, which sometimes diseases us, but most of the time assists us by its colonies, its societies, its methods of reproduction. All these insects are extremely clever. And if you talk to a good entomologist, he will scare the wits out, because he will show you the most conclusive reasons why insects should ultimately take the whole planet over. Fortunately, we are not absolutely abominated by flies, because we have lots of spiders. And we have birds. And so birds and insects are mutually necessary to each other. And especially flowers and insects have an arrangement with each other whereby one could say of flowers and bees that although they look very different, they are one and the same organism. Flowers perfume and color. Bees buzz and fly around. But you can have the flowers without the bees, and you can't have the bees without the flowers. And so you can think through relationship between every conceivable kind of organism, into which you must add things like atmosphere qualities, gas content of atmosphere, on and on and on, until you suddenly realize that what you call your mind and intelligence and your very brain and body is utterly involved with this network of other kinds of organisms, existing at a special temperature in certain gases, which could only be found in certain kinds of solar systems. Now then, seeing that, you should give every technologist pause. Because you can't go running into that situation with penicillin and DDT unless you know very well when to stop. Unless you can be very discriminating just what surplus of insects you want to get rid of without killing the other ones that are important. How to give penicillin without destroying all the stomach flora? Having to build them up again with acidophilus and stuff. So, this is why in the Taoist Chinese view of nature and the relation of nature to human politics, they set as fundamental the principle called Wu Wei, which means non-interference. Not quite what we mean by laissez-faire, but rather close to it. That is to say, when you act upon nature, and you can't help but interfere, there's no way of isolating yourself from the world. Every time you breathe, you interfere with something. But the art of Wu Wei is that when you interfere, endeavor to do so by going with the grain of things. In other words, if you want to split wood, split it with the grain. Don't try to split it across the grain. And likewise, when you want to pick a fight, don't use violence, but use the other person's violence to bring about his downfall. That's judo. And that judo is applied Wu Wei. Sailing is Wu Wei. As distinct from rowing, which isn't. So then, the Taoists, you see, recognized that there is this universal organism. And they thought of the cosmos as a great organism without a boss. There is no one in Chinese philosophy making the world happen or ordering it. There is no, as it were, central principle in the middle which sets out commands to all the subordinate parts. But rather, that the thing organizes itself. Their word for nature is Zudan, meaning what is so of itself. So they saw the whole cosmos as a self-regulating organism. And they further saw that the individual is not merely a part of that organism. He is an expression of the whole thing. And the whole depends upon this expression, just as much as the expression depends upon it. And that is the principle of mutual interpenetration, which is called in, it's more familiarly known by its Japanese name, Jijimuje. The principle of the network. Between thing event and thing event, there is no obstruction. But you see, it remains to us a bit of a puzzle to say that all this is an intelligence, because we can think of all kinds of objections to it. We can think, if by some conscious science we were able to construct the universe, we would do it a little differently. We would have improvements to suggest about mosquitoes. We would, perhaps a great surgeon might suggest that the human body be organized a little differently. We can think of dozens of things. But you find the curious thing is this. When you try to think out carefully how to improve the world, and then you realize that what the consequences of your suggestion would be, you wouldn't like all of the consequences. careful of what you desire. You may get it. And then one invites the individual, and this is one of the great, great things to do, to suggest another kind of universe. What kind of universe would you design if you were God? And I recommend, I'm not going to go into this because it's a long story, but I thoroughly recommend it as an exercise in thought. Model your own universe and see what comes out of it. Because I can only tell you that you will eventually discover that you will model this one. And you'll find out, you see, that it's based on certain absolutely fundamental principles, which of course includes the game of hide and seek. Now you see it, now you don't, which is vibration, which is the same thing as energy. You've got to begin with that. But that, once you start with that, it implies the rest. Because all that we see around us is just a fantastic combination of black and white elements of what the Chinese call the yin and the yang, the negative and positive forces. And it all leads to this, but in an incredible dance. So then, you have difficulty, though, of course, in seeing the world as an organism. Because when you look out at the stars, you are in roughly the same situation or relationship to what you are seeing as when a physicist studies the constitution of the atom. He will make a map of the behavior of the nucleus in which there will be various rotating particles or wavicles. And you will see something which looks like a mathematical design and doesn't look like an organism. Because we expect an organism to be a kind of gooey thing with blood, flesh, wriggles, and so on. So if you looked only through the microscope, you wouldn't see the organism. But when we look out at the rest of the universe, we are, as it were, sitting down on one of those electrons, looking through a microscope at the rest of it. And therefore we don't see the sort of total design it makes up. That's much too far away from our conscious perspective. And this is one of the reasons then why it's difficult for us to formulate the idea that there is an intelligence operating here. Because all we see is a firework display. This tremendous display of radioactive mud and gas. And one would say, well, it's just a kind of a contraption that happened to arrive there, and that's all there is to it. But the funny thing about man is that he can put himself down and say that he is an accident, a kind of colloidal chemical accident that occurred on this very unimportant rock, rotating around a lesser star on the fringe of one of the minor galaxies. And that this is where we are, and that the universe does not give a damn about it. And yet the odd thing is that this wretched little chemical thing can reflect an image of the whole cosmos and its vastness inside its head, and can know he's there. And that means, though, that this thing, however small in dimensions, is vast in comprehension. And what scale are you going to attach the word importance to? Mere size? Or degree of comprehension? By degree of comprehension, man is huge. By that scale. So then, if the principle is simple, that if we conceive from a perfectly physical point of view, what we would call a strictly scientific point of view, that the individual organism goes with its environment in just the same way as bees go with flowers. And flowers in their turn go with grubs. And grubs in their turn go with birds. And so on, all the way through. Then, when you want to define yourself, you cannot say that I am just what is inside the skin. Because what is inside the skin goes with everything outside and constitutes a single, complex field of diversified behaviors, diversified processes. You look at that then from a strictly physical point of view, and there it is, this network. But then the trouble comes up. You say when you've studied that, and you've read all the books on ecology and botany and zoology, astronomy, and so on, you say, yes, I see that. That's theoretical knowledge is not going to have much effect on what we do. But knowledge of a more emotionally compelling nature will indeed affect the way we act with respect to our environment. And may, in fact, prevent us from destroying our environment, as we are now very busily doing. It's interesting that the Congress of the United States recently passed an act making it a very serious offense to burn the American flag. And they passed this act with many patriotic speeches and rhetoric and much reciting of poems. But this is the most fantastic example of American confusion between symbol and reality, between mainstream and rule. Because this same Congress is directly or indirectly responsible for burning out what the flag stands for, namely the geographical United States and its people. By not really doing much about the devastation of our forests, the pollution of our water and atmosphere, the reckless waste of our natural resources, and resorting to a form of economy, which under any the same circumstances would be termed sheer lunacy. Now, you see, they cannot distinguish between the symbol and the reality because we are all hypnotized with words and symbols. And so when the flag is more precious than the country, we are insane. When you say, I love my country, and what you mean by that, you feel certain emotions when you salute a flag, you don't love your country at all. Because to love the country means to participate in its life in a loving way, in a considerate way. And after all, our animals are, in a certain sense, members of the United States. Birds, bears, all these lovely creatures. And what we are doing is we are getting rid of birds that are fast raining. We've reduced certain populations of birds by as much as 75% in the last few years because they eat our poisonous insecticides and so on. But eventually they get into us. That's love of country. So, as a result of this confusion and failure to see that the outside world is not a kind of chunk of mineral resources, cows, to be exploited, to be just eaten up. If we do that, we turn ourselves into a swarm of locusts on the planet. The price for eating beef is that you must farm beef. You must conduct husbandry. You must help cattle to multiply, and you must care for the crop. The same with fishing. We have not husbanded whales, and therefore they're on their way to extinction. This is the price, that you've got to cherish the animals that you live off. And then furthermore, after that, to put in my particular prejudice, you've got to cook the crop. You don't just chew it up because it's supposed to give you energy. It's good for you. That's an irreverent use of dead animals, dead plants. They give their lives for you. The proper response to that is to take it with reverence. And that means cook it well. So that your act of cooking is like the rituals of a priest at an altar. This is the sacrificial altar, the chopping board and the range, which we use. And it's not a kind of a kitchens are not to be looked on as sort of lavatories where you throw things together to put in at the upper end. So, but this can only come about, you see, in a situation where human beings are vividly aware of the external world as much themselves as their own bodies. And you must allow yourself, therefore, to feel that what you see is not merely something out there. It's in your head. And your head's in it. And these things mutually interpenetrate each other like this. Now it's in your head, now your head's in it, now it's in your head, now your head's in it, like this, you see. And this rhythm sets up what we call vision. So if you see that the external world is as much you as anything inside your skin or anything inside your head, then you have a certain respect for it. And no longer consider matter, for example. Take a piece of wood. A piece of wood is not just a chunk of stuff. But people think about wood that way. You can't be a good carpenter if that's the way you think about wood. We think we're dealing, you see, with these inert, unfeeling blocks of stuff. Rocks have no feeling, of course. Bang it around. Mountains have no feeling. Blow them up with magma. But they do have feeling. And if you heard them, as the Indians say, I've just been with a whole bunch of Indians. They say the continent of the United insect pests will multiply in all sorts of strange ways, and finally get rid of them, and leave the land of the Indians, who originally owned it. Let's have a brief intermission. The question arose this morning about the problem of whether the extension of the network, especially by electronics, might not abolish individual privacy. And I said I was planning to devote this afternoon's session to that problem and some of its ramifications. This, of course, is the area of the problem with which Marshall McLuhan is very largely concerned. For he has pointed out that just as the wheel is an extension of the feet, and as beyond the wheel naturally comes the horse and carriage, the automobile, and the airplane, all these technological creations are extensions of the human organism. And finally, the electronic network of telephone, telegraph, radio, and television is an extension of the nervous system. And into that we must throw, as an additional extension of the nervous system, the computer. The computer into which data can be fed from the files of the insurance companies, the Internal Revenue Service, the police, credit agencies, everything. So that in a matter of seconds, when an individual is identified, an enormous amount of information about him can be instantly known. In a rather similar way, the time is not too far ahead when you will be able to have a box about so big on your desk, which has a little screen on it and a dial. And after dialing a key code, you will dial the catalog number of any book in the Library of Congress that you want to read. And at any rate that you wish, the spread pages of that book will appear on your television screen. And you can get it right like that. When we get to the television work with the agency of laser beams, you will of course be able to see solid three-dimensional images in color projected in a certain area. You can walk around it. I haven't discovered yet whether you can kiss it. But when you get a phenomenon like that, it begins raising the question of where somebody actually is. When the reproduction becomes technically perfect, you see, you won't know the difference between the reproduction and the original. That's going to be a new kind of confusion. And we will perhaps even be able to think about the word reproduction in a new sense. We say now, one of the meanings we give to the word reproduction is sexual reproduction of the species, or the biological method. Then we have reproduction through photocopy, and all that kind of thing. Let's suppose, too, that we begin increasingly to be able to manufacture the parts of the human body in very perfect kinds of plastic. So that when your heart goes wrong or your kidneys go wrong, the surgeon will simply replace them with a plastic reproduction, which will work equally well. And perhaps they'll never be able to reproduce in plastic brain, but they can at least put in there a radio device which will connect with a computer system of some kind, which will do the same job. So that then, after the years go by and your parts have been replaced, the serious question arises as to are you the same individual? And we would say, well, no, you've been entirely replaced. Of course it does. You're being replaced all the time, though by a different method. And just as, say, an institution like the University of California, which is a very rapidly changing university, and for some mysterious reason it remains the University of California, recognizable as such, even though the students, the faculty, the office and what then is the university? The university is a pattern of behavior. And the organisms involved in that pattern keep changing. But the pattern retains an identifiable continuity. So does your body. So does the whirlpool in the stream. So do the hot springs down below. Although the water is running through them all the time, it's never the same. So you can envisage the reproduction of the human being in this electronic way. And at first you say, oh horrors, are we going to be converted into nothing but plastic replicas of ourselves? Will we be there in any sense anymore? Will the soul survive? But you see, in the case of the University of California, it is what we call the University of California that is the soul. And this bodily expression keeps changing. So, when we find out that we are electronic echoes of ourselves, being perpetuated through the ages, we shall come to the astonishing conclusion that that's what we already are. Only we have to do it again ourselves in order to realize it. We are already the most remarkable electronic patterns from the standpoint of physics. So let's a bit lay that bugbear to rest. Although I must say, there is something about plastic in its present stage of evolution that is somewhat repulsive. There is a state of consciousness which those who are psychedelically hip or hip call the plastic doll, in which everything looks as if it's made of plastic, as if of patent leather or enameled tin, that it only reflects light and has no light inside it. There is another side to the vision, whereby everything becomes living jewelry with light inside, a kind of beatific vision as distinct from a diabolic vision. And at the present stage of its development, plastic always suggests the diabolic vision. But it is through the diabolic vision that you gather the deepest insights. It's really profounder than the beatific vision in a certain way. Because if you can go down into any experience, I hope you understand the meaning of this phrase, go down into. It's very important. It means exploring a certain sensation or a certain feeling, to find out all its implications, to find out what it is at root that you like about it or dislike about it. And you will find, if you explore the plastic doll vision sufficiently carefully, that it will bring about in the end a far greater depth of bliss of realization than merely exploring the things that are lovely at first sight, obviously so. So one should think about this funny thing of technology, considered as artificiality, in the light of the realization that there really is nothing artificial. You might say the distinction of the artificial from the natural is a very artificial distinction. That the constructs of human beings are really no more unnatural than bees' nests and birds' nests and constructs of animal and insect beings. They're extensions of ourselves. So then, what about the situation when it arises that we are all computerized? That no one is hidden. I want you to notice something already about the Bell Telephone Company. They have a regulation whereby you cannot switch your telephone off. You may have an extension in the house and you may switch that off. But you may not switch off your main phone. And if you leave it off the hook, it starts screaming after a while. They bet that not many years hence, the ordinary telephone will disappear and every individual will carry around with him a thing about the size of the old pocket watches. One side of it will be a TV screen and a speaker. The other side of it will be a set of buttons, over which you just place your finger to activate. You'll be able to dial world information, who will give you the number of any given individual. If he doesn't answer, he's dead. So under such circumstances, absolutely no one can get lost. And then you see, as this moves on, let me develop some of its further possibilities. People like Toynbee and McLuhan have noted that as technology progresses, to separate. First it does this. Then it does this. Then it does this. And then it does this. See? Now, these things here are peduncles. From the Latin root pes, pedis, meaning a foot. Some sort of protrusion out of a globular body. So notice then that the production of a peduncle here in the form of a connecting neck and here in the form of little tails when the neck is broken, that in the course of the development, when we reach this stage, the peduncles have disappeared. According to Desjardins, this is why we do not find missing links around in the evolutionary process. They vanish in accordance with the law of peduncles. Now, in exactly the same way, the human technology sets up certain kinds of peduncles. A road, for example, or a railroad is a peduncle. Because with the development of automotive traffic, truck traffic, the railroads become increasingly obsolete. And there are rusty old tracks lying all over the country that are not used anymore. And then with the development of aircraft, the road tends to become obsolete. With the development of radio, the wire as a connection, as a peduncle, becomes obsolete. So that more and more, the connecting links that we saw in a visible way disappear with the development of more expert types of communication. We can easily take this a step further. When we develop a form of electronic communication, such that you don't even need to take a plane. You want to see, supposing I want to see my father in England. We both have these laser beam TV jobs. And like that, I can recreate in front of him myself and my exact environment, everything around, just as if he was sitting in the room. And I can do that with his set on the other end. So that eventually we don't need to take the plane. You can conceive, as some science fiction writers have, what seems to us a rather appalling situation, where you never need to leave the place where you're sitting. All food supplies and everything are automatically delivered. You just dial what you want, and some kind of mechanical process that transmits it to you. Then they go further than that. They don't. They really abolish food altogether because they've got it down to some special essences which you take. Then they go beyond that, and you give yourself a certain kind of electronic stimulation, and it does all for you that food could ever do. And then you think, oh dear, what's the next step beyond that? Of course. The next step beyond that is, of course, there's one thing here, one peduncle we have to get rid of. And that is the black box, the electronic gadget. Because by the time we've become as etherealized as that, we move into telepathy and psychic communication. And as soon as you make that step, of course, it would seem that all privacy whatsoever has gone. Because what you are inside is an open book to everybody else. Your thoughts are easily read. And therefore, you may say at first, ooh, that is the conversion of humanity into an anthill of the worst type. And this is in a way, naturally, what all properly educated Americans, and I will add properly educated Britishers, and some other peoples, dread. It is said the Englishman's home is his castle. And everybody needs a castle. A place where you can get away from it all. And just be yourself. But even then, when you're away from it all and you're just being in yourself, you've unfortunately got a lot of thoughts inside your head that aren't yours. Because you think in the English language, and that was given to you by other people, and contains their prejudices that you can't avoid within thinking. Japanese people will say that when they think in Japanese, they can have certain feelings that are characteristically Japanese. But when they start thinking in English, they can't have those feelings. And so you are very, very much really in the sphere of public influence when you start to think. And if you listen carefully to your thoughts, insofar as they are uttered in words, and they very often are, try and discover the tone of voice in which certain of your thoughts are being said, and you will listen and hear your mother, or you will hear an aunt, or you will hear a school teacher, or will hear certain friends expressing their opinions and telling you who you are and how you ought to behave. And you think those are your thoughts, and they're nothing of the kind. And in a pandemonium under the dome of the skull is going on all the time. Myriads of voices, myriads of influences from outside working upon you, even when take the experiment, for example, that B.F. Skinner used to try, which is very terrifying. He would send two members of the class selected arbitrarily outside of the room. Then he would arrange two chairs, chair A and chair B. He would say to the class, now look, when these people come back, we're going to engage them in a conversation. Whatever A says, agree with him. Whatever B says, disagree with him. So they come back into the room and they take their seats and the conversation begins. Now B may be a very strong-headed, articulate person, and A really rather feeble. But what happens is this, that by group agreement with anything A says, he is encouraged, he is built up, he becomes more articulate, he finds himself sprouting. But B, by being disagreed with on every point, begins to get baffled and confused and feel very uncomfortable indeed. Unless he is onto the game and he challenges the whole group. I see now what you say. You have made up your minds to disagree with everything I say. Therefore, of course, you don't come. I shall pay no attention. So, in this way, you see, we're already colossally influenced by each other. And this is why I think that Harry Stack Sullivan's basic ideas about psychopathology are in some respects more profound than Freud's. Freud is always looking into the individual history, into the physiology, into the depth psychology of the individual in an interior sort of way. But Sullivan was always looking to the individual as the expression of a social network. And the same in the psychology of George Herbert Mead, where he called the conceptions that we have of ourselves the interiorized other. In other words, the sum total of all the things that people have told us we are. Because you do not know yourself as a self, except in a society. Just as you do not exist biologically without a father and a mother, you do not carry on an existence without a society. And the reactions of other people to you provide you with the mirror in which you attain a realization of yourself. You know who you are in terms of your relationships with others. So then now, when we contemplate this disappearance of privacy and a completely integrated human society, we can look at this from two different points of view, pro and con. Let us first look at the pro point of view. How great to have nothing to hide. How great to give up all worries about ownership. Because you can say, if somebody says they would like something you have, you say, please, have it. Because you know very well you can go to someone else and say, could I have that? And they'll give it to you. And so all the way around, there is no propriety, in the sense not of prudish propriety, but propriety in the sense of possession. Now also, of course, in the sense of prudish propriety. Nobody has any dirty little secrets, because if I have any dirty secrets, I know very well that you have too, so let's drop the whole pretense and let go. So in this sense, there might be a very, very close fellowship between all people, in which there are no barriers, no defenses, and we all cooperate together beautifully and love each other. Now, let's look at the con point of view. Con point of view would say, yes, but surely, the more we communicate with each other in that way and have no property, and there are no boundaries, and there are no fences or defenses, then, just in the same way that jet aircraft makes all cities the same city, so this would make all people the same individual. Would that be what the Hindus mean by saying you are all one, you are all the Godhead in disguise? Would it mean that? Now, part of our difficulty in approaching this is that we begin from the standpoint of a certain conception of the individual person. And this is, of course, the Christian ego, which is the soul as a center of action and something alive with consciousness and intelligence that lies hidden in the bag of skin. As, for example, King John says in Shakespeare's play to Hubert, within this wall of flesh there is a soul, counts thee her creditor, and with advantage means to pay thy love. See the image? Within this wall of flesh there is a soul. Within the castle there is the king. And every man's soul is his castle. And so, those of us who are brought up in that way, who feel A, that we are basically the soul in the body, and B, that a soul that exists is of infinite value in the eyes of God. We therefore have instituted, since the Industrial Revolution, a tremendous sick has to be thrown away, but of some individual to be loved and cherished and properly treated. And because individuality, each particular human organism is infinitely precious. That is the moving ideal of the sort of people who first created the great hospitals, who abolished slavery, who abolished the death penalty for trivial offenses, who made that great humanitarian movement in the 19th century associated with such people as Wesley and Charles Dickens and Wilberforce and so on, to rescue the precious individual from the ravages of impersonal disease or impersonal political exploitation. Then, when a kind of American capitalist liberalism achieved to some extent this sort of ideal, we look then at political forms which are socialistic or communistic and are leery of them because they seem to go back on all that. So, of course, did National Socialism in Germany. Because the position there, it is not the individual who is the supremely important being, but it is the community, the state, which is supremely important. The individual realizes himself as a servant of the state. But our theory in the liberal capitalism of the United States is that the state is the servant of the individual. That we employ policemen and soldiers and sanitary inspectors and Department of Commerce officials, all to serve us. We call them public servants. And when a policeman gets uppish, he has to be reminded that we pay his salary and that his job is to serve us and not to be a kind of Admiral Crichton sort of butler who takes the upper hand. But of course, the very idea of a servant still calls it, has in it, doesn't it, something aristocratic. And as we all know, in this country, it is increasingly difficult to get services of any kind.